This is Glenn Pendlay with the Weightlifting Scoop, and we have both Don McCauley and Travis Cooper here today. And we're going to talk about something we've been wanting to do a podcast on for quite a while. We just haven't done it. We're finally going to do it, and that is coaching and competition. And inevitably, on my forum, other places around the internet where folks talk about weightlifting, there's always a call for, how to count attempts and do other things associated with coaching a lifter in competition. Or, just like was recently on the Pendlay forum, lifters that are going to their first meet and going alone without a coach and saying, give me some hints. How do I time my warm-ups? What weights do I pick, etc. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about from start to finish how to either enter your first meet and time your own warm-ups and pick your own attempts, or if you're a coach that is new to the game and you're coaching someone at their first meet or your first time as a coach in competition, how to go about it. And got a couple people here who are very good at that. Both Travis and Don have had a lot of experience, and I have done it a couple times myself. And hopefully we will answer some of your questions and give you a good idea of how to go about your first meet, either as a coach or lifter. Travis?
So the first thing we're going to talk about is leading up to a meet. So knowing your lifter, knowing yourself, how to pick your openers. So if this is your first meet, you obviously want to be very conservative on your openers. But if it's not your first meet, you have an idea if you typically hit higher numbers in competition or lower numbers in competition than your training lifts. So you need to take that kind of thing into account. So picking openers is very important. So Glenn, any strategies on that?
Well, if it's your first meet, I would probably suggest that you don't open with something that you can't double or that you haven't doubled. Certainly something that you are pretty consistent at. And anytime you're in your first meet, it's always better to be conservative rather than optimistic. So if you're wondering, should I open at 93 or should I open at 95? Open at 93. If you're going back and forth between two numbers, pick the most conservative one. A lot of times people get their egos tied up in their openers, and that's the wrong strategy. Focus on what your third attempt's going to be, not your opener.
Yeah, be conservative. Make lifts in your first meet. Get your confidence about competition. Don't go out there and go 1 for 6, 2 for 6, 0 for 6. Go out there to make 6 lifts on your first competition. Any thoughts, Don?
Okay, Don.
Yeah, I concur. I think that's what you do in your first competition. I think you make attempts. I think you get your feet wet. You get confidence on the stage. You find out all about the things we're going to talk about in a minute, about warm-ups and all that stuff. And you come back in the second meet and you try to go a little better. But the first meet is about making some attempts out there, getting used to, again, being up in front of an audience, waiting for a referee to give you a down signal, things like that.
And I think also continuing to talk about people that are going to their first meet, assume that you're going to screw up, assume that you may do something stupid like forget to wait for the down signal, or you will end up following yourself, or you'll end up having to sit for 7 or 10 minutes between and you won't know what to do, and there'll be a lot of stress, and you won't know how far you are. All those little things, just assume something's going to screw up, because it probably will. It probably will. And so take a worst case scenario kind of and pick your openers, bearing that in mind, because that's the last thing you want to do is go into a meet and bomb your first meet and bomb. That just puts even more pressure on you for the second meet. It's all downhill. Well, it's not all downhill from there, but it's all downhill from there. You're ruined for the sport forever.
You're living on the street.
Exactly. Or a van down by the river, one or the other. No, I mean, you want a positive experience in your first meet, even if it costs you 2 or 3 kilos off your total. That's hard to, that's kind of difficult to convince some people of, because they're gung-ho and they want a total 150 or 200 or 300, whatever number. But get some lifts in. I think that changes if it's your second or third meet, picking your openers. I think once you've got your first meet out of the way, you have a goal. You shouldn't really have a goal your first meet. I mean, you shouldn't have hard numbers. You have to hit these numbers. Go in and make lifts and be happy. But past that, usually, you're going to have a goal and you're going to pick your openers pursuant to making that goal. But leave your first meet just to have fun and make lifts.
So what do you think is a good number, like 90% if it's your first meet? Open around 90%, something that you know you can make. You can probably double 90%.
I think that's probably as good a rule of thumb as any. It's probably very similar to the thought that, a lifter in his first meet should not open with something he hasn't doubled before. That they're probably within a couple of kilos of each other. But that keep in mind that there are no hard and fast rules there. Every lifter is going to be a little different. There are lifters who, let's say can make 95 kilos 10 times in a row, but 99 or 100 kilos is very, very iffy, and they might make it one time in 5. Everybody's a little different there. There's other lifters that might make 80 5 times out of 10 and 90, 8 times out of 10 or 90, a little less, that are, more inconsistent with lower percentages of their max. And if you're in that camp, you may have to open with something you can triple in order to have a weight that you can make 9 times out of 10. If you're more consistent, you may be able to open above 90% to go to a weight that you can make like 9 times out of 10 or make doubles with. So you have to use some common sense there. I think one thing that a lot of people make a mistake of when they're thinking about things like this with the sport of weightlifting is they are so looking for a rule, some hard and fast number, that they leave out common sense. And if you just take away the numbers and the rules and the whatever, what makes sense? You may be the person that can take 90+% and make it time and time and time again, make it 50 times without missing it. If so, why open with something too much lighter than that? Use your common sense a little bit.
If you get in the habit of missing your opener, if you don't make your opener on that first meet or in your second meet, you kind of get stuck in a rut. You think like, I just can't make my opener. So the point being is, if it's your first meet, make sure you make your opener. It's just something that really gets your competition career started right.
Yeah, some things become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And the more times you miss your opener, the more scared you're going to be and the more nervous you're going to be every successive meet when you go out and take your opener. And being scared and nervous like that is going to make it less likely in the future for you to make your opener. Opener should be a given, a weight that you make, in the vast majority of competitions. So get yourself started right.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically it. I think you get into these first contest situation, second contest situation, or your first jump up into a bigger type competition, like your first American Open, your first Nationals. What you should be looking to accomplish is have a little fun, get used to what this is like, and make a total, and not put undue pressure on yourself.
So that was a good bit of talk to the lifter who's going to be competing for the first time in the future. But if you've already competed 5, 6, 7 times, you have an idea if you're a meat lifter or a training lifter. So do you lift more in competition? Do you lift more in training? Like, you should honestly evaluate that kind of thing about yourself and your lifters. So with that being said, so choosing openers is very dependent on that. And so you need to separate your PRs in competition and out of competition so that you can choose openers accurately.
Yeah, there's so many different factors there. PRs in training can come after 5 misses. You could try to snatch 100 kilos 5 times and finally make it on the 6th time. You may be 2 or 3 kilos overweight, and that can affect some people a lot, other people not as much. Chances are you may be using straps in training, and that definitely can take a few kilos off your snatch. So I think what Travis just said was actually something I've seen people overlook a lot, and it really can't be overlooked. You have to know when you pick your openers, pick it based on a realistic number, what your best snatch is in competition, your best clean and jerk in competition. They're 2 different things, and even depending on your style of training, some people use a more conservative training approach, and they never snatch close to what they do in competitions. Their competition PR is going to be higher if you're aggressively going after maxes in competition or in training all the time. Think about all the advantages you have in training that you don't have in competition to, make a very borderline lift. right up the edge of your abilities. So other people train, much differently, and they're never going to snatch or even attempt a PR or single in training. So take all those things into consideration, use your common sense, and try to pick, a number that you should make your opener at least 90% of the time.
Yeah, and if you are one of those people that seems to always have a little more in competition than they do in the training room, it's still a good idea to be relatively conservative on your first one. There's nothing that sets you up for a competition, whether you're a newbie or not, better than making a first attempt. Mentally, that's a good thing. Now, it may be if you're a competition lifter, you might raise your first attempt to, maybe 95% or something like that of what you've ever done, or your PR in competition, rather than 90 or 92%. But you don't want to start, I was really good in competition, so I'll start with a PR. No, something like that. But again, there is a little room for wiggle in there if you happen to be lucky enough to be one of those people that drive coaches crazy and is a competition lifter, and in training you just don't show it.
Yeah, I think one thing that goes along with that is when you talk about the total you want to make, I see people back in themselves into this all the time, where let's say somebody wants to make a 360 total, and they think about it and they keep upping their opener and upping their opener because I want to take 3 shots at the lift I need. That rarely works. When you think about the total that you want, think about the total on your third attempts. I would really want to snatch 160. Think about, then I need to go 50, 55, 60 and not 60. You'll have a better chance of making it if you do that.
So for me personally, I tend to lift better in meets. So I usually try to pick a weight to open with in the snatch that I've completed at least 10 times with straps and at least 3 times without straps in training. But that being said, sometimes now I hit 155 with straps, but I had failed to snatch 150 without straps. So I knew that, 150 would be a big weight in competition without straps, making weight and all that stuff. But I make 145 every single training session without straps leading up to nationals and Pan Ams. And I had snatched 145 several times without straps leading up to the meet. So 145 was a very good opener. Knowing myself, evaluating what I normally hit in competition, I know that usually I'm opening at a weight that I've made in competition multiple times before because I've competed a bunch of times. So I would try to avoid, unless it's been like over a year since you've competed, try to avoid opening with a competition PR in competition.
Yeah. I would add that, like I said, Travis, using his example, he's competed for like 7 years now. Certainly a little different situation than a new lifter in their first meet. But also your best snatch in competition came this last meet when you opened a couple kilos lower and made 3 attempts. So, making attempts is the key to a big total, not necessarily what you open at.
Yeah, and that's an important point. It really is. 1 or 2 kilos early in the series is not going to make a whole lot. You got to look, as Travis said, you got to look at making, and Glenn said, you got to look at making 3 snatches, and that's where your total is in 3 clean and jerks. If you've saved a little energy on your first one by having a little bit lighter weight, then you've saved a little energy, and that's a good thing. It's going to make it more likely that you're going to have a couple of more real good lifts.
Yeah, so our choice at nationals was I talked to Glenn, and we decided that 148 was the most important weight for me to make in the competition. So our choices were to open at 143, 144, or 145. With that being said, if you're confident that you're going to make 148, we got in the game at 143. We jumped to 148 and made it, and that was really the number we were going after, was that second attempt. So that's kind of why I opened a little lighter at nationals. But yeah, it worked out. It's about making a series of snatches, getting your confidence, and just going from there. But so I think we kind of got this, going. Once you're at the competition and you're in the warm-up room, so from a coaching standpoint, we've talked about that you're going to take 7 to 10 attempts in the snatch or the clean and jerk leading up to your opener.
Yeah, it's usually closer to 7 or less than that in the snatch, but less than that in the clean and jerk for an experienced lifter. But I would encourage, somebody who's not very experienced, first meet, second meet, whatever, to go closer to 10 or in some cases even maybe 11. You really don't want to be making big jumps up close to your opener on your warm-ups if you're not very experienced. Really same with clean and jerk. But probably the biggest mistake most people make is they take too many warm-ups. And you see a lot of people that are like 12, 13, whatever warm-ups for a snatch. And the only problem with that is, you're tired out by the end of the meet. You've got to save something. And I think it is probably useful to warm up and kind of go through that series in training sometimes if you're an inexperienced lifter. In other words, practice a time or two hitting your opener and warm up like you would in competition and hit your opener and get used to doing that in training so that your warm up progression is not totally different in competition, something you've never done before. You want to be familiar with going, like, say, if you're opening at 90, going 40 or going like 50, 60, 70, 80, 85, and then hit 90 as your opener. It's useful. It gets you, you kind of know what it feels like.
Yeah. I think it's very useful to go through competition practice, warm-up room practice before you ever get to one. And we're talking 7 to 10 sets or reps. I tend to think 7 to 10 sets because sometimes early, if I'm doing 40 kilos, the lifter might do it 3 times. He might do a set of 3 with it just to warm himself up. That might be part of his warm-up. But yeah, you should do that before you ever get to a competition.
Once you get within 3 or 4 attempts of your opener, you're definitely doing singles.
Oh yeah, no, it descends just like the amounts descend between the weights as you get closer, of course. And another thing is,
well, Don, let's hit on that a second because that's not something we said, but I think that's important. Is your first, if you're taking 7 attempts your opening snatch, your first 2 or 3 jumps will be bigger jumps.
Right.
For a guy snatching the 150 or something, he's probably going to jump 20 kilos per warm up.
Could very well.
And then it drops to 10 and maybe even to 5 on the last warm up jump.
Right. You want the last, like you said, 3 or 4 warm ups to more or less simulate the kind of jumps you might be making out on the stage. They're certainly getting smaller as you get in heavy. And again, the early warm up sets might be 2 or 3 rather than a single all the way up. Although I tend to prefer, in the clean and jerk part of it, doing singles because I figure you're already warmed up and clean and jerks take a lot of energy out of you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so usually you're going to be warm. Your body should be warm. You come back there. You might do 1 or 2 doubles, but the rest of them should pretty much be singles. So, try to come up with in training a series of snatches that is about 7 to 10 warm-ups. Typically, I would try to teach yourself to get to your opener in 7 attempts. I think it just uses less energy, and if you're consistent, then that's and also if you need to take a bathroom break, like I'm the king of going to the bathroom when I get nervous, so build those in and tell your coach, or if you are the coach, ask the lifter. You don't want them having to go pee when they're supposed to open. So,
yeah, if you have the slightest inkling that you're going to have to use the bathroom, try to get that done early in the warm up series. Don't try to hold it and then save it to when you got 1 warm up left, and the time is really tight, and all of a sudden
2 guys jumping, you're up.
Yeah, and you don't do that. That can spell disaster. I've actually had lifters do that before at like junior nationals, and I basically want to just punch them in the neck. Because seriously, if you gotta you need to use the bathroom, that should happen early, either before the warm up start or early in the warm up progression for sure.
So typically we're gonna take a warm up every 3 attempts, and we count an attempt as a minute. So it's gonna be about 1 minute per attempt, and we're gonna try to take 1 warm up every 3 minutes. And so Don.
Yeah, that's just about right. You can count attempts or you can count minutes. Sometimes you have to count minutes because you might be the first guy up in a session, and there's you've just come back from being introduced on the stage, and usually what's the break? 15 minutes after the introduction?
That's what it's supposed to be.
Supposed to be.
It's not always, though, and that's an important point.
And that's the thing you've got to check. You've got to ask, especially if you're new and you're into a regional, national kind of competition. You've got to check with the judges, the tech guy. What's the break going to be between introductions? And remember, you're going to be out on stage there for a bit. So you may have to start your 7 to 10 warm-ups before you go out on stage. Say it's a 10-minute break after the stage. That gives you time for about 3, maybe 4 warm-ups at the most. So you better have 4 or 5 done already.
Right. Absolutely.
So most people are going to want to take a warm-up every 3 minutes, but not everyone. Some people like to go fast in the snatch, slow in the clean and jerk. So adjust that based on the lifter. Know your lifter, or if it's you, know yourself. But typically, like Don was saying, if there's a 15-minute clock and you got 7 warm-ups, well, you need 21 minutes to go through that warm-up. So you're going to have to take 2 warm-ups before introductions. And so just know that awareness, and that's why it's important to count an attempt as a minute, because that clock before the session starts is pretty important.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to do when I'm timing, when someone starts their warm-up, is I like to write. I have a little notebook that I carry with me to competitions. And at nationals, I left my little book behind. I forgot it. And so Don actually went out to his car, and he and tell me how this sounds. He just happened to have a pink little book in his truck. So I used his little pink book all weekend.
Hey, beggars can't be choosers, kid.
Well, you're right.
I had a warm-up book.
Yeah.
Some people have a black book. Don McCauley has a pink book.
Exactly. Now, I usually have, I usually got the little moleskin little book that you buy at like the bookstore. What's the big bookstore? Barnes and Noble. Yeah, they sell them at Barnes and Noble. And it's small enough to fit in your pocket, but big enough to write on. And I write down the warm-up progression. What I do is I write at the top of the page. Let's say it was Travis, and he's going to open up at 143. And so I'll write 143 at the top of the page, and I'll circle it just to make sure that I know that's his opener, not another warm-up. And then I'll count down from there. I'm like, well, what's the last warm-up you want to take? And let's say he says 138, which was the case in this situation. All right, 138. Then I'll go to the line below, and I'll say, what's the next to last warm-up? And in this case, it was 130. And then for Travis, it was then 120, 110, 100, 90, 70, 50. And I will write a number out to the side. And to the side of the last warm-up, 138, I'll write a 3. I'll dash 3. I'll make it to the side. And then I'll write dash 6 on the next warm-up, dash 9. So what that tells me is that when there's 3 attempts left before Travis's opener, he's going to take 138 as his last warm-up. When there's 6 attempts left, he's going to take 130, and on down the road. Now, let's say that this isn't usually the case with Travis, because he usually opens like the last of anyone, or near the last. But let's say your lifter is like the second or third lifter in the session. If he's the third lifter in the session, then you would have that number 3 written by his last warm-up. And that denotes that you take that warm-up with 3 attempts, when there's 3 attempts remaining before your athlete opens. But the next warm-up, you'd normally have written a number 6, but there's not 6 attempts before him. So at that point, you have to start going by the clock. And so at that point, you would write when there are 3 minutes left. And actually, because you have the clock winds down, there's usually a slight delay while they reset it to a 1-minute clock for the lifter. I would actually take a minute off of that and write a 2. So the first attempt, or the last warm-up would come when there's 3 lifters left on the clock, and that's basically when the first lifter is going out, assuming your lifter is the third lifter. The next would be on the clock. It would be when there's 2 minutes left on the 10-minute clock. And the next warm-up after that would be when there's 5 minutes left on the clock. The next warm-up after that would be when there's 8 minutes on the clock. The next after that would be when there's 11. Well, let's say there's only a 10-minute clock. Then you just know that for that warm-up that says 11, anything after that, but beyond that, the first few warm-ups have to be done when the clock is at 11. And so just, keep that in mind, and that's a nice little way to keep track of when you have to, or what has to be happening when you take a certain warm up, either by the clock or by how many lifters left before your lifter. I think I explained that fairly well, didn't I? Are you lost? Are you lost on?
No,
okay.
I got you.
The next thing in that whole thing that's important is, how do you know how many attempts are left before your lifter?
The very first thing you want to do when you get to the competition as a coach, as soon as those cards are on the table and the screen is there, you want to count how far your lifter is out once the competition starts. Because like we said, if you're not 21 attempts out, which most people are not going to be, you're going to have to start before the competition started. You're going to have to start warming up before, and sometimes before
either the 10 or 15 minute clock
for
starts.
intros, exactly.
Intros, yeah.
So typically there's going to be like 8 to 10 lifters per session. Let's just use 10 for instance, because that's easy math. So there's going to be 3 lifts per lifter. So for the unopened lifter, you're going to count 3 attempts. So if they're opening 10 kilos less than you or more, you want to count a full 3 attempts before your lifter.
And that's obviously just because most people don't jump 5 kilos per. They don't jump 5 or more kilos per lift. Most people that open on the snatch with 100 are not going to jump to more than 105 on their second, and certainly not going to jump more than 110 on their third. So if you're opening at 112, and there's 3 guys opening at 100, well, all 3 of those guys are almost assuredly going to take all 3 of their attempts before you're up. So that's 9 attempts before you.
Right, and that's that's the best you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to. There's always the guy that does something crazy, and they'll do more than that, but normally not.
Yeah.
Normally not.
Let's take that. Let's say, and I think we'll all agree here. I mean, there's a little fudge factors. You got to realize that something could, go a little wrong. But let's just say that there's 5 lifters before you, and you're opening at 110. One of those guys is opening at 90. Okay, that's 3 attempts before you. Okay, he's going to take all 3 of his attempts before 110. Let's say there's another guy opening, or another 2 guys opening at 100. Well, chances are both of those guys are going to take all 3 of their attempts before you. Okay, so that's 9 attempts before your athlete. Now, there's another guy opening at 105. Okay, that guy is either going to take 1 or 2 attempts before you. He's likely to go 105. If he misses it, he'll take it over. If he doesn't miss it, he's probably not going to jump to 106. He's probably going to jump somewhere lower than that. So he's either going to be 2, maybe 3 attempts before you. Let's say there's another guy opening at 107. If he makes it on his opener, he's going to jump above you, above 110 for a second. So that's only 1 more attempt before you. So we've got 9, 10, 11, 12. We've got 12 attempts before you in that situation, right? No, 12 plus 9 plus 6, 18 attempts before you.
Yeah. So for the lifter who's going to take 3 attempts before you, so if they're opening 10 kilos or more below you, count 3 attempts for that. So you got 3 lifters opening 3 kilos or more than 10 kilos below you. That's 9 attempts. Somebody's open 5 kilos below you. Assume they're going to make their opener and jump 5 kilos because that's a standard, especially at the local level.
Especially guys.
Yeah, they tend to take 5 kilo jumps. Women sometimes take 3 to 5 kilo jumps on their first, but normally 3. So it is a little different. But so just know that. And so if you're looking at a board, and you see open slots, you're counting 3. And if you see that they've opened already, if you're just glancing at the board, count 1.5 per opened lifter. So because they either have 1 or 2 lifts left. So you're taking the average. So if you're just glancing up there, you're just counting how many people have unopened. Boom, boom, boom. That's 5. And then there's 5 lifters who've opened already. So you're counting 1.5 for them. So 1.5 times 5 is what is that, 7.5? So
yes.
Then you're just going to count 8 because you're more likely to. So point being, you can just glance at the board very quickly, see about how many attempts someone is out, just to guesstimate, like if you're in the range of how many lifts are still on the board, and And that's just an easy trick that helps you kind of see it real quick.
Yeah. One thing I always do when you have, say you have 4 lifters that are definitely going to be 2 attempts before you lift, maybe 3. Then I'm going to count 3 for half of them and 2 for the other half and split the difference. If you're opening at 108 and there's 3 guys open at 100, I may count 3 of them at 3 attempts before me and 2 of them or the other 3 at 2 attempts before me. Chances are you're going to be about right. And you don't have to be perfect, but you don't want to be 5 attempts off.
And you can adjust your warm-up, so it doesn't have to be exactly 3 minutes. In training, you take lifts on the minute. Sometimes you take lifts every 2 minutes. So, have your lifter train different ways, take different amounts of times between lifts so they can adjust. And also have a backup plan. If you screw up your counting, have a warm-up routine that you can take out a lift. It just helps to be able to adjust. And so I know the numbers here. It's kind of hard to follow some of it. But point being, count beforehand. Before the competition starts, how many lifts your lifter is out. So if you need to start before the competition starts. And so basically once you've opened, that's where a lot of the coaching strategy comes in. So you've already counted, the lifter's warmed up, they're approaching the platform, they take their lift. At this point, there's an automatic increase of 1 kilo, and you don't have to do anything until the clock is running on your athlete.
Yeah, once the clock starts, you have 30 seconds to make a declaration. And what this means is if you don't make a declaration, they're not going to sit around and just wait for you with a blank space on your card and wait for you to declare a weight. They're just going to put down a 1 kilo increase from whatever lift you already made. If you missed your opener, they'll put down an automatic repeat. So if your lifter opens at 100, he misses, they're going to put down 100 and load the weight, adjust the weight and start the clock. If your lifter opens at 100, he makes it. Probably someone else is going to open. Maybe somebody else opens, whatever. But whether or not another lifter is up or not, they're going to add 1 kilo to the bar and start the clock. That's automatic, whether you say anything or not. Now, at this point, you have to make a declaration. If you don't make a declaration, your lifter has to take that weight. The declaration has to be made within 30 seconds. And I would suggest even if you're going to take that weight, that you make the declaration. Because if you don't make the declaration, then you are barred from changing your weight at all. Normally, you get 2 changes. If you don't make a declaration, you don't have 2 changes. So if your lifter makes 100 kilos and they put down 101, at the very minimum, just go ahead and say, I declare 101. Make the declaration. That way you have time to go ahead and make changes.
Yeah, so then you have the declaration and 2 changes. So you could technically change the bar 3 times.
If they put down 101 and you actually want to declare 103, you can let the clock start on 101 and then make a declaration of 102 and then make your first change and your second change. That is technically 3 changes, unless other lifters come before you. So if they put down a 101 and 2 other lifters make their lifts, at that point you're set at 101. So you have to make the declaration within 30 seconds.
So in competition, the person with the lowest lot number or highest lot number, so the person with the lot number closest to 1 takes that weight first. So when you make a change, that doesn't change throughout the competition, right? Like if you're all on second attempts. Yeah.
As long as the first rule is whoever lifted the most recently is lifts second. If 2 people are on the same weight, mm-hmm. and one guy took 95 and the next guy took 96 and you both went to 100, the guy that took 95 will lift first.
Okay. Yeah. But when you're opening and you took the same weight, the highest lot number closest to 1 then takes that weight. So making a meaningful declaration. So basically, if you're running on the clock and you're following yourself, you don't want to declare the same weight as the automatic increase if you're wanting rest. You want to declare a weight that is not the automatic increase. So it's important to make a declaration, first of all, so you have your two changes. But it's also important to make a declaration that makes sense. So if you open at 105 and you're following yourself, you want to declare 107 because the clock started running on you. They had to make the change. Then the clock started running on 106. And then you want to declare.
And then when you make your declaration of 107, they have to stop the clock, go out and change the weight. And that gives you a little extra time. Once the weight's changed, they start the clock back running again.
Right, but if you declared 106, they wouldn't have to stop the clock. So that's something to think about, is actually making a meaningful declaration. And then your two changes, you can change the weight 2 more times leading up to 110 if you wanted to take that for your second attempt. So that's kind of how people buy time in weightlifting. Some people think that's the most boring part of weightlifting, but it's a necessary part because it's really hard to take lifts very, very quickly and put together a good series of snatches or clean and jerks specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. That's it is boring to watch. It does slow down meets. But the whole idea, when you're coaching a lifter, your job is not to make the meet as exciting as possible or run as fast as possible. Even though in the end, a lot of people wish meets ran faster. But your job is to get as much time for your lifter to rest in between as you possibly can. At any local meet, that's going to happen way more often because you're going to have less people that are more widely spread as far as their ability levels. But when you're at like nationals or a closely contested meet, very normally you're going to lift. Then you're going to have 3 or 4 other people lift, and then it's going to come back to you as the weight on the bar slowly rises.
Yeah, and I don't want to go over this too much because we got a lot to cover, but this points out in my mind, and I think we've talked about this before, but probably, especially if you're in a meet with a team and you might have 2 or 3 lifters in a session, it points out the need for having a couple of coaches in the back room, somebody to take care of this declaring and watch the clock and watch the other people making changes, and somebody to work with the lifters. But in any case, the declarations are important, and getting that stuff done is important, and getting your lifter rest is really important.
So the reason why making your declaration is important is because now at a local meet, you're probably going to be helping each other out. You're really supportive. You want everyone to make lifts. It's a great experience. A national competition is kind of like that, but you're also it's a little more fierce. You know, there's some strategies that you can use. So kind of like you would freeze a kicker in the NFL, you can freeze a lifter. If you see that their coach has miscounted for them, they've been sitting around between their last warm-up and their opening attempt or their first attempt and their second attempt for a long time, making a declaration that makes the clock run on you or leaving the automatic increase on you, on your lifter, can freeze that lifter. So if I open at 105 and my competitor is opening at 107, I can open at 105 and then I recognize that their coach has messed up their counting or they're sitting there for a long time. I can let the automatic increase run on me for 29 seconds, and that freezes and flusters that lifter. So that's kind of a strategy that you can use. So making meaningful declarations and changes is very important.
Or, you know, one of the other things that is actually has the opposite effect is if another lifter opens at say, you know, 105 and you're at 105, they miss. You know, you can let the clock, as long as you let the clock start on your lift. If you don't let the clock start on your lift, then they may, if you say it's their second attempt and it's your third attempt, they may they get a 2-minute clock. If you jump up, they get a 2-minute clock. But if you actually let the clock start on your lift, run 1 second, then move up a kilo, then instead of getting a 2-minute clock, they only get a 1-minute clock. And you know this, especially in a clean and jerk. If somebody just did a hard-fought clean and barely missed the jerk, and instead of, you know, being a nice guy, and say you're going against that person for a spot on the world team, you know, and instead of being a nice guy and giving them a 2-minute clock, if you let the clock start on you for 1 second, let your name be called and the clock start, and then jump a kilo, then they only get a 1 minute clock. And sometimes that, can be the difference between them making a clean and jerk and not. And, that's not something I would normally do or suggest doing in the vast majority of situations. But hey, if you're in a battle with another lifter and you can advantage yourself and disadvantage that lifter, then, there's really no reason not to take advantage of it.
Doing it. I think that's what you did.
I suggest doing it in a combative situation.
Let's face it. Yeah.
In a combative situation where you're in a contest with another lifter, both trying to, win or make a total or make a team or something like that, I think that's perfectly all right. But, if you're in a local meet and your buddy's, taking an attempt the same as you and you screw him over like that, then somebody should punch you in the throat.
Yeah, I think so.
Definitely.
Yeah, so freezing a lifter and speeding up when the lifter has to go out to the platform. I mean, those timing issues are very important in weightlifting. And if somebody's really antsy to get out there and you can freeze them a little bit, they're kind of freaking out. They're thinking that they want to take that attempt right now. If you can add an extra 29 seconds to that, that's kind of a big deal from a mental standpoint. And, like Glenn was saying, they just changed that rule recently. In like January of 2011, 2012, where if the clock started on you and you bumped up, then and that lifter was following themselves, they now only have a 1 minute clock. So that really does change the atmosphere in weightlifting, and sometimes people bump up a kilo to gain more rest in that situation. So
absolutely. You want to go over the clock on missed attempts?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, 99% of the time, if you miss an attempt, I would say that you should retake that attempt and not bump up. The exception would be, let's say you miss your opener at 120 kilo snatch, and if you retake that 120, you're going to follow yourself. But if you bump up to 121, you got 3 other lifters opening at 120, and that gives you a good solid rest. Sometimes that can be smart. Just to get that at 3 minutes of rest is probably more advantageous than 1 extra kilo on the bar.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about something in the warm-up room that I just didn't even think of. But and I'd like the opinion of both of you guys on what you do or what you would do with a lifter, Glenn. What if you've got a lifter and you've worked through the warm-ups and he misses his last warm-up attempt? What do you do? What do you say?
That's so dependent on the lifter, I mean, if it was Travis, I would just say, well, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, because he's been in a sport for 7 or 8 years, and if he did something stupid on a warm-up, he's going to know exactly what he did, and it's not going to affect him mentally because he's went out and opened with, the weights that he's doing time and time again over a period of years, and it probably wouldn't affect him. If it's a brand new lifter, if it's possible, I might lower the opener.
Yeah.
I mean, it very much depends on the lifter.
Right. That's basically what I would say too.
Well, this year at Nationals, I mean, you were helping me coach Mike Zella.
Yeah.
And he warmed up like crap. I don't think he missed any openers, but he definitely didn't look good. No. He pressed one out, and I lowered his opener from 23 to 20 when he was right after he had taken his last warm up. Right. And 20, he made it. He made the 20.
Yeah, he didn't make anything else.
He didn't make anything else. Yeah. But I mean, that's a very individual thing. And I would say that if you're an experienced coach and you're dealing with experienced lifters, you just have to play to that lifter. You're going to know the lifter. The lifter's going to know himself, and you use common sense.
Yeah, and I think it's important to watch the whole warm-up as a coach. Watch the whole warm-up and evaluate the warm-up as the whole warm-up, not one lift maybe. No. Again, maybe it's somewhat of a rule that with a newer lifter you might lower, but I think it's the individual more
with a newer lifter, I mean, discretion is always the key, and I think that a newer lifter is going to get mentally messed up more by missing, and is going to have a lot more self-doubt and a lot more lack of confidence, whatever you want to call it. But I think much more often, the vast majority of time, if you got somebody that's in his first 2 or 3 competitions in their first year of lifting, whatever, you want to open with something they're confident in, and if they're missing warm-ups, you lower things down.
That goes back to what we were talking about before. With the newer lifter, the whole thing is about making attempts anyway.
Yeah, and with a more experienced lifter, and like to use Travis as an example, going to nationals and making a low total, and not ever getting big third attempts on the bar, might as well not have competed. I mean, he competed for one reason only, and that's to make sure he was on the world team.
Yeah.
And so if he was just going to go and do conservative lifts and say, I didn't warm up well, so I'm going to snatch, 30, 35, 40 or something, you might as well not competed. There's just a whole different set of goals and a whole different mindset going in, which is totally different than somebody in their first year of competition.
Yeah, so just like every other attempt, you make your declaration at weigh-ins for your opener, and you have two changes. So typically people are going to declare a weight that's lighter than what they're going to open with to give themselves a little leeway. And that also allows the coach a little strategy. But typically, so a lot of that is going to depend, my opinion, is going to depend on what's on the bar. Is it going to change when they lift? Because if they just took their last warm-up and they miss it, and they're going to have to go out right now to take a lower weight, and it's only like 2 kilos different, then, hey, I'm going to let them rest. And I'm going to tell them, well, actually, I missed my last warm-up in my very first competition. And CJ Stockel came over to me, and he said, let me tell you something. He said, you don't win championships in the warm-up room. You win them on the platform. And I went out there and went 3 for 3 in the snatch, or 2 for 3 in the snatch, and made a PR. So, point being, I mean, in most situations, you're probably not going to be able to deviate too much because you've counted and you've made it all the way to their last warm-up, 3 attempts out. So you're probably going to be kind of stuck, and you're just going to have to tell them that exact statement is, hey, you win championships out on the platform. The warm-up room doesn't really matter.
Yeah, and that's kind of getting into one of the reasons why we thought about doing this topic a long time ago, and I really hesitated, not really being real enthusiastic about doing it, because something Travis brings up there is every situation is different. You can't go down a list of rules or a decision tree that you can adhere to 100% when you're talking about warming up a lifter in the back room. I mean, if the weight on the bar is 90 and your guy's opening with 100 and he just missed 95 badly, then you would be able to say, okay, let's move the opener down. But if the weight on the bar is 98 and you're opening at 100 and you just missed the last warm up, the lowest you could lower it down to would be, depending on your lot number and what the lot number is on the platform, you may only be able to lower it to 99. Is that really worth it? Probably not. So every situation is very different, and that's why I mentioned the whole common sense thing. I mean, you have to go back to that. I mean, you have to use your common sense, because there's no way to in a podcast like this, there's no way to go over every single situation.
Yeah, I think as a coach too, you've got to be the calming voice in the back room there. You got to be the guy that kid misses his last warm up. He's got to go up, just like Glenn just said. He doesn't really have time for a do-over. You can't drop him very far. You've got to be the guy that says, hey, you warmed up good. That was a little mistake here. Don't worry about it. We're ready. You're looking good. And that's the best you can do. But don't like twirl around and run out of the room. That'll be a bad signal to your lifter.
Yeah. One other thing that I want to bring up now, I hope this is the right time. Travis has got this planned out on a little notepad like he plans out everything. Travis is so organized, sometimes he annoys me.
He's got a very clean car.
Yeah, his car's very clean. But when it comes to timing warm-ups, and there is a lot of room for something to go wrong or work out a little differently than you thought it would. One thing that's very important is know your lifter, because very often, you're not going to know for sure exactly how many attempts are going to be taken before your guy goes. Somebody could miss their opener and have to retake it. That adds an attempt. So often a 2-minute clock. Somebody could jump up that you didn't expect them to. Say you're opening at 135 and there's 2 guys opening before you, and all of a sudden one of them jumps to 136. And now you got 1 lift before you. Different lifters can be more comfortable either waiting around and taking a slightly longer than expected wait, or some lifters, they're much more comfortable taking a smaller break. For instance, if I think that it might be, depending on if someone else misses, if someone else jumps, it might be 3 to 5 attempts before my lifter's opening lift. And you're very often in that situation, especially at bigger meets, because more people are opening closer to each other. And if it was Travis, I would probably go ahead and take the last warm up, because he is more comfortable sitting longer than he is being hurried. So if it's 3 attempts, that's just right. If it's 5, Travis will still be fine because he's comfortable sitting a minute or two too long. On the other hand, if it was James Tatum, I would probably let another lift or so go by, because if James Tatum had to wait 2 or 3 minutes longer than he wanted to, that wouldn't be good for him at all. On the other hand, if he only had to wait for a minute, 2 minutes instead of 3, he'd be fine. So different lifters react to those situations differently, and often you're not going to know for sure until you're actually called to the platform. And so you have to know, what to err on the side of warming up too quick, or to err on the side of warming up too slow.
Yeah, you got to come in with a flexible plan. Like we were saying, there's unlimited, there's an infinite number of situations that can arise. So, we're just trying to give you certain strategies, 7 to 10 warm-ups, 3 minutes between each warm-up. You can freeze the lifter. You can speed up their attempt, making meaningful declarations and why those are important. So, every situation is different. And like, if your lifter would prefer to go slow as to fast, then see, if there's a possibility of you being 3 or 5 out, go ahead and still take the lift. But if your lifter likes to go fast and you're possibly 3 to 5 out, then you might want to wait 1 attempt and kind of meet in the middle. So yeah, knowing your lifter and knowing yourself. And
some of that comes from, it's just experience in competition. For instance, I know certain other lifters when we're in competition with, say, at nationals or somewhere, and even international meets, you can identify after a while, you've coached a while, you can identify countries that normally bump their openers. Some coaches will write down the openers that they actually plan to take and that they will take at the weigh-in. And when you see that their lifter's opening at 130, 160, there's a 95% chance, unless something crazy happens, they're going to open at 130, 160. On the other hand, there's coaches, I'm not going to try to name names, name a list of who's who, but there's certain coaches that when I see their lifter at 135, 160, I'm pretty damn sure they're going to open at 140 or 142. Or, something like that. They always bump their openers. There's different ways to kind of fake out somebody, write down a low number in the snatch, but a high number in the clean and jerk, so your changes aren't predictable. Things like that. But different people play different games, and usually a certain person will play the same game meet after meet after meet. So after you've coached for a while and you've seen different coaches in competition time after time again, seen different lifters in the same situations, you kind of have an idea of this guy might bump, this guy probably isn't, things like that. But you're not really going to know all those things your first nationals. That's just the little things that come from, going to nationals 10 years in a row or something, and knowledge that you'll kind of build up over time that will help you more accurately predict, what the real opener is going to be or how big the jumps are going to be, all of which will have a bearing on how soon your lifter is going to be up.
So one thing that is interesting, too, is you can actually declare a higher weight, and on your next 2 changes, you can bump that weight down.
That's something that Chinese coaches use quite a bit. You'll almost never see it at the Pan Am Championships, but you'll see it at the Worlds from the Chinese or Asian countries.
The Pan Ams are always jumping up.
Absolutely.
So why would you do that, Glenn? What situation would you?
Well, that's a way that if you have a lifter that you're going to try, you need to beat. Say you're going for a gold medal and you got to beat some joker from, Cuba by 1 kilo. If they have started out, with a heavier third attempt declaration than you've got to jump to go ahead of them by 1 kilo to give your lifter the chance to win on the platform. But you've already changed once and they haven't. And so if they change again and you change again, your 2 changes are done. They can then take their second change and jump right ahead of you, and you're stuck. You don't have another change. But let's say that this little strategy session is taking place at 180 kilo clean and jerk. There's nothing to stop you from jumping up to 200 for your declaration. Then you can effectively wait them out to take all the changes that they can, or actually go out on a platform to lift, and then you can bump down to 1 kilo above what they lifted to assure yourself that you actually have the ability to bump your weight to something that is the winning weight.
Yeah, and that's something that I noticed at the World University Championships a couple times, was that the Chinese coaches tended to do that. They were very good at getting the right weight on the bar for them to win. So obviously this kind of thing is not something you're going to do at a local meet. At a local meet, most everyone's going to be helping each other out and doing that kind of. This is kind of something that you do at an international or national level when you really need a certain weight on the bar. So you can declare a higher weight, and then you have 2 changes to bring it back down. So by declaring that higher weight, if the other coach only has one change left, by declaring that higher weight, you force them to put that weight that they want on the bar.
Right. And it all comes down to the point that you have 1 declaration and 2 changes. And if you're chasing somebody else and trying to get the ability for your lifter to take the winning weight, you can't get behind on the number of changes. You know, you've got to be ahead of them and bumping way up beyond anything that's even reasonable, and then bumping back down when you know exactly what you need is a way to accomplish that. Run them out of changes, and then you have the change left to take the winning weight. The one thing you have to be careful of, once the bar's loaded in weightlifting, it never can go back down. So if you're employing that strategy and you sleep on the job and let the bar go up to a weight that's above what you actually need, you can't bring it back down. You have to be awake when you're doing that and make your change when you have to make your change, and not 30 seconds late when they've already started loading a heavier weight.
So do you guys have any other topics as far as competition goes? Like we said, number one thing, wait for that down signal on that opening attempt, or all your attempts. As a new lifter, that's something that Glenn said in the beginning of the podcast passively, but obviously that's pretty dang important as a coach. It's their first meet. Wait for that down signal.
Did you just call me passive?
I said that comment was passive. I didn't say Glenn is passive.
Yeah,
I said
I got
that
you.
comment was
He could punch you
in there
neck.
passively.
Yeah. Something else that is I think just a general statement needs to be said here. And some of the things we're talking about, as far as the strategy and things that can kind of screw up your competition, or strategies of putting down your weights when you're in the weigh-in that will kind of psych somebody else up or down. Those things are generally things that for national and international competition, everyone will hate you for the rest of your life if you employ those type of strategies at the North Carolina State Championships.
And they probably know where you live.
They probably know where you live. So there's really 2, I suppose you'd say, different strategies in a weightlifting competition, or different levels. Generally at the local level, even the state level, and for a lot of people at the national level, because there's a lot of people at nationals that aren't going to win. They're not going to make the world team, but they're trying to get their best total. If your goal is to get your best total, all of that stuff generally is not applicable, and that's the majority of weightlifters. When you get to the point where you are trying to get a gold medal at nationals, and winning is more important than necessarily the exact total, or you're trying to score points in international competition, that's when some of those things that we're talking about, as far as bumping your opener way up and then bumping it back down, that's where some of that stuff starts to come in as far as competition strategy. Certainly, we do not suggest that you go to the North Carolina State Championships or any other smaller local meet and employ those type of strategies. People will not like you. I wouldn't like you if you did that.
No, nobody will like you at all. Couple of things I wanted to go over. One that back to the warm-up room and the attempts and the amount of time it's going to take for the attempts. For new lifters or new coaches with lifters in the back room, make sure that you know that the lifter knows that when I say it's time to warm up in the back room, that he has already done his stretching, he has already done his running around, he's already done his PVC pipe work, and when we are going to warm up, we are starting with our last 7 or 10 attempts with the bar. And the second thing is that I want Glenn to answer this, because he just had a recent situation like this. What's the difference in the strategy, and what's the difference, what do you tell a lifter when you are not going to necessarily win a place in a meet, but you are trying to make a world team and you have to take a big jump, and it may you may essentially give away a place if you don't.
I think first off, that's got to be the lifter's choice.
Yes.
You know, I wouldn't try to tell, this had recently happened with James Tatum, and I mean, I wouldn't try to say, James, you could win nationals if you went X weight, but instead we're going to try to do 5 kilos more to make the world team. If you have any inkling those situations are going to come up, and this really applies to a lot more situations than just that, but one of the things that is extremely important before anybody starts to warm up is that the coach and athlete are on the same page as far as the goals. You know,
exactly.
An athlete might say, you know what, I don't care where I place. I really want to total 200 kilos. And in that case, you know what, the athlete should be the boss. So if that's his number one goal, then the attempt should be picked to give him the best chance of totaling 200 kilos, whether he wins, whether he loses. You don't want to change goals midway through the stream. You know, you get done with your first clean jerk and all of a sudden it's like, I really want to beat that guy. If I have to, you know, attempt XYZ for a 210 total, I want to throw everything to the wind. Settle on your goal before the meet ever starts, preferably before the day of the meet. You know, everybody should be clear on what the goals are, you know, and recently what he's talking about, James could have taken a 163 snatch to win nationals, or he could have jumped to clean and jerk. Yeah, I wish snatch, clean and jerk, or he could have jumped to 171 to try to get a spot on the world team. And James was very clear that his number one priority was a spot on the world team. We jumped to 171 to try for a spot on the world team. He missed it, but that's what his goal was. And it was a reasonable attempt given that he had clean and jerked 170 in training. So, you know, that was his call, what his ultimate goal was.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to ask that question, because, guys, that is good advice from a good coach. You and your athlete, should have that talk before you get into the heat of the warm-up room. Be clear about it.
Emotions can get too high in the warm-up room.
Oh, God, yeah.
Things should be settled on what the goals are way before that point. And I wanted to throw in a couple things, too, that are just, you know, general observations here. One is the whole eating plan after weigh-in and also during the warm-ups. You definitely, I have been guilty of this before, and I've seen lots of other people that are guilty of it, where the after weigh-in food intake is not even thought about till after weigh-in. And then it's is there any restaurants close to here? Do you have any Gatorade? Does anybody have Gatorade? Where can I get what, you know, you know before you go to weigh-ins what you're going to eat, where you're going to eat, have it available, all of that stuff. Same thing with in between snatch and clean and jerk and any fluid or anything that you need to eat during the warm-ups. I'm a big proponent of taking a light snack, whether it be, you know, half a banana or half a sandwich or whatever the athlete's comfortable with after snatch, especially if you've had to cut weight. But have all that worked out and available before you weigh in and before you're there. The other thing, and this is a pet peeve of mine, and I have probably been fairly close to assaulting people on several occasions because of this. But you've got athletes that, you know, are, you know, you go to a meet and all your buddies that you haven't seen in a few months are there and this and that and the other. And all of a sudden, it's time to warm up and you don't even have your friggin' shoes on. You know, that happens, I think, too often. It even happens at nationals. And I would say, after you warm up, you need to start thinking about lifting and not about socializing quite as much. And, you know, for coaches that are out there, I would rather have the warm-ups, the singlet, and the shoes on 20 minutes too early than 5 minutes too late. There's a lot of times when warm-ups get really rushed and everything because people just let time run away with them, and they don't have their warm-ups on, they don't have their singlet on, they don't have their shoes on. So that's something that really you can just not think about and let time get away with you. So once you warm up, you know, get your gear on, get ready, and like Don said, you don't want to be, as a coach, you're watching the clock, introductions, you're like, okay, 50 kilos snatch loaded on the bar. Let's take it twice. And oh, wait a minute, I still have to take the bar. I still have to do my jumping jacks and my shoulder dislocates and my whatever other god-awful stuff you have to do to prepare to lift. I mean, get that stuff out of the way. And as a coach, figure that in. Have a time that you're going to tell your athlete it's time to do your stretching. Have your shoes on, do your stretching, all that, before you just kind of let things go to the point where you're going to say, let's take 50 kilos and the athlete's not ready. One other little thing that can be important. Does the athlete that you're coaching have to walk over to the chalk bowl and take 30 seconds to chalk their hands and then come back over and take their attempt? Or are they sitting there ready, chalked up? When you say take 100 kilos, they're going to stand up from the chair, walk 3 steps to the bar and take 100 kilos. This can really kind of screw you over in competition. Let's say there's 3 guys left to go on the platform and you're up. You're like, okay, take your last attempt. And instead of standing up and taking it, they stand up and go through this long routine of walking to the chalk, chalking, getting their singlet straps up, doing all this. And by the time they actually lift the bar, they're 1 out. And so I would prefer, of course, as a coach, I would prefer that all athletes just sit down and ready to take the attempt, but that's...
I would prefer having a taser.
Yeah, a taser, something like that, maybe a shock collar. I don't know about a taser,
like that,
but as a coach, what you really should do as a coach is know your athlete. If it's going to be 60 seconds or 90 seconds after you tell them to take an attempt, they actually take the attempt, consider that. Work that in. Tell them to take their last warm-up when there's actually 4 lifts to go instead of 3, so that they're actually right. That can really, if there's a huge long delay between telling them to take an attempt and they're actually taking it, figure that into your calculations. Remember to figure that into your calculations so you don't get caught.
So, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of this stuff, if some people didn't understand everything that we said, and nothing teaches you how to coach in competition or be in competition more than competing. So, don't wait until you're ready to compete. Compete. Get out there. As a coach as many people in competition as you can so you understand the rules and the tricky rules within weightlifting, and observe other coaches. And if you have any questions, you can tweet us at WLiftingScoop or email us at the weightliftingscoop@gmail.com, and we'll be happy to answer your questions. We know that this is an incomplete podcast because it would be impossible to cover everything. There's an infinite number of possibilities, and there are articles on this, but to be honest with you, it's impossible to write an article on this or do a podcast on this because there's so many different potential scenarios that can come up.
Yeah. One thing I want to add to that, and that is some things that I did in the past, to try to make myself a better competition coach, and that was volunteering for people that I thought were good coaches, good competition coaches with good athletes. And just at competitions, just saying, you know what, I'll load your weights for you. I'll help in some way just so that I can be back there and observe the timing of the warm-ups and how it all goes. I think I did that for John Thrush a couple times and several other people, more than a decade ago, when I was, trying to learn as much as I could. And I've had several people, one in particular, Jacob Sipkin. Every time I've been at nationals, he is always right there saying, can I help, even if it's just loading weights.
Glenn?
What?
Jacob's just sucking up.
Well, that may be, but still, my point is experience kind of trumps everything else when it comes to in competition handling lifters, and especially in a pressure situation when there's a strategy and you've got to pick the right weight, and things like that. It really, there's nothing that can substitute for actually doing it. And that's a great way to get in the warm-up room, be able to take part in, a more experienced coach coaching, a good lifter, and observe closely and even be involved in it. And I don't know any coaches that would turn down somebody saying, hey, can I help load the weights? Can I do this? Can I do that?
I wouldn't let Simkin do it.
Well, I would never turn that down because it's helping me.
This is a good thing. This is good advice too. This is a way to learn.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm 42 years old. I don't like loading all those, especially if I got 10 lifters in the meet. By the third day of the meet, I'm freaking tired. My back hurts. Somebody wants to help out and load, or even be available to run to the score table and change a weight or something. If you need it, then that's absolutely great. And as far as I'm concerned, that's like the best way to learn is find somebody that you think does a good job of it and try to help out or some way involve yourself. I think most coaches would be amenable to that, and that's a great way to learn.
I think a couple, so there's obviously been rule changes in weightlifting. One of the rule changes was changing from 2.5 kilo jumps to the 1 kilo increment rule, which happened in 2005, and they just changed the rule about the 1 versus 2 minute clock 2 years ago. So if you're a coach,
and for a while the automatic increase was 2 kilos after the first
after
attempt.
the first attempt,
and then they changed that.
So
was it 2 for men and 1 for women?
Yeah,
Yeah.
And then they went 1 for both.
So that right there, I mean, that was kind of a big deal, and I'm glad they changed that back. But point being is that there are like nuances in the rules that do change. So watch, if you're a coach and that's what you want to do for a living, then by all means watch international competitions because they make changes. Pay attention to what the IWF's doing so that you can understand how to correctly coach in competition. So just because you learn it and you learn everything there is up to this point, they might make a little change that totally makes a difference in how you coach in competition. So always stay up to date.
Absolutely.